Hello, my name is Dr. Paul Nolting. I've been working with students for the last 15 years and helping them become more successful in mathematics. In fact, several years ago, I did my dissertation on students who failed mathematics 1 to 5 times. I took these college students and taught them study skills, test-taking skills, and memory skills. And then, when they retook their class again, they became more successful in mathematics. What we want to look at now is how to help you become more successful in mathematics. And it's a little bit more background about myself. I've helped thousands and thousands of students become more successful by doing workshops just like this one. I do them around the country. I also train faculty to become more successful in teaching math study skills. Currently, I'm considered a national expert in this field, and what I want to do today is help you become more efficient in studying and learning. I'm going to teach you some of the secrets of the trade of how you can become more successful in understanding mathematics and also showing that knowledge on the test. The workshop is going to be divided into 2 parts. Part 1 is on preparation and test-taking skills. Part 2 is on analyzing results and improving performance. Part 1 is what we're going to do right now. And Part 1 of the workshop can either be viewed individually or in groups. I'm going to treat this as a live session, so I'm going to be asking you questions, and you can answer back. That's not going to be a problem. Another thing we're going to think about with mathematics. Mathematics is the critical filter in education. That is, the more math you know, the better job you can get in the future. And a lot of students stop taking math because it's difficult and it restricts their career area. We're going to teach you how to be successful in math and go as far as you want to go. Now, Part 1 consists of 3 different areas. The first one is reasons why you may or may not do well in mathematics. The second one is on test preparation. And the third one is on test-taking skills. Let's look at this first one. This first one is pretty famous because a guy named Dr. Bloom, which all your instructors out there who are watching this should know this person. Dr. Bloom did a lot of research on achievement. And we were finding out that this circle right here represents a student's grade as they walk into the classroom. 50% of the circle is what we call cognitive entry skills and IQ. That is, how much math you knew when you walked in the classroom door. Also, how fast can you learn mathematics? Now, a lot of times this is determined by placement tests, and that's how we use that to put you in the right class. Over here, the quality of instruction, that's 25% in your grade. That's how your teachers teach, how your tutors help you out, also how you can watch videotapes like this and improving your learning skills, and then also we look at the quality of instruction from a point of view of matching learning styles with teaching styles. Now, that's really only 25% of your grade. Now, what about the other 25%? Here it is right over here. This 25% is in your hands. It's called affective characteristics. What is it? Anxiety, attitudes, personality, self-concept, study habits, and locus of control. Basically, is how we can help you become better at learning and taking tests and studying and motivating you. Today, in Part 1 and in Part 2, we're going to focus on this 25%. In my dissertation, I held this constant and improved this, and the students' grades went up. So right now we want to start looking at how we can work on this 25%. Starting with your first test, we need to improve your test preparation skills. Before we start talking about test preparation skills, let's just talk a little bit about locus of control. An external student expects the teacher to teach it to him, expects the tutor to teach it to him, and really doesn't take much responsibility in learning the material. In fact, an external student may be looking at these different steps here and decided, well, I may do this one, may do this one, may not do this one. Now, an internal student, on the other hand, takes responsibility for learning mathematics, takes responsibility for going to the tutorial sessions, and also will learn every one of these steps. What we want to do is teach you to become more internal and take the responsibility, because we know that students that are internal become more successful in mathematics. Now let's start looking at these steps right here. This first one, reviewing your notes. Okay, reviewing your notes is very important because as you review your notes, the information goes from short-term memory into long-term memory. Also, it reminds you how to do those problems so that when you see the test questions, you can say, I remember, I saw that in my notes. The next one is reviewing your textbook. The reviewing the textbook is very important because the textbooks these days are written where the information is very easy to read. For example, in the D.C. Heath algebra text, they have what we call the blue notes. Those are notes that are actually in blue. They have the most important part of the text in there. So if I'm reviewing the text, I'm going to read all those blue notes and write them down and understand them. Also in that D.C. Heath textbook, you have chapter summaries. Chapter summaries overview the whole chapter. If you see those chapter summaries and understand those, you probably know the information in the whole chapter. So now you become more successful by reviewing. Constant reviewing increases your chances of recalling that information on the test. Cramming doesn't. Let's look at the next one, reviewing old tests. Now later on in part 2, we're going to really talk about reviewing old tests, but I'm going to mention it right now. Most students make the same type of what we call systematic errors over and over and over again. And we start looking at these systematic errors. You could be a sign dropper, you could not reduce all the way, and some students don't even know this. So as we look at old tests, we can figure that out. Also with the old test, if you have some type of concept error and don't understand something, you can fix that and understand it before you go to the next test. What we don't want you to do is throw away these old tests and then end up looking at the next test and say, oh my God, I missed that one on the last test. And I still don't know how to do it. Next one we want to get into, pre-tests. Very, very important with pre-test. I've had students who form study groups only to do pre-test. In the pre-test area, what we do is have maybe 3 or 4 students develop their own test. They'll probably do maybe 10 questions, and they'll go to their group of 4 and pass out the 10 questions. As the students are doing the 10 questions, the student who's actually done those questions can answer the questions of the other students. So pre-tests are important. Also in the textbook, you have a pre-test. And that really is at the end of the text chapters where you can take the test yourself, take it underneath time conditions like a real test. The main reason we want to give you a pre-test is for you to find out what you don't know before you take the test and not on the test. A lot of my students say, wow, I just did that the other day, but I forgot how to do it. I tell them if you had a pre-test, you would know you didn't know how to do it, you could practice it, you see the same type of problem on the test, hey, you're pretty successful then. Pre-tests are very important. Even though they may take some time, they can pay off in big grades. Next one, study groups. Study groups are becoming very popular today. A lot of us are very communicative. We want to talk about that. We want to talk about our different math problems. And as we talk about that, we learn it. Usually study groups could be 3, 4, 5 people. And in the study groups, you can explain to other students how to be successful in math. Also explain to them how to do the problems. We found that the students who do the most explanation usually makes the better grade, because as they explain it, they learn it better. Now, one of the last things we got to look at is calculators. This is important too. More and more classrooms require calculators and require calculators on the test. If you're not proficient in the calculator, you're behind the other students. Whereas the other students could be using the calculator, get finished with the problems quicker, and be checking their answers, you're still trying to learn how to do the calculator. So the main thing about calculators is number 1, learn how to do it before you take the test. Number 2, clear it. How many times I've worked with students who didn't clear the calculator. Number 3 is developing some type of strategy of how to use the calculator to solve the problems. Now the next thing about calculators is in your upper level classes, such as graphing calculators. They're very good. They can give you a visual image on how to do the problem, and also that visual image can translate more into learning. So what we want to really look at is all these test preparation skills. And in these test preparation skills, the more you do these, the more successful you can be on the test. So let's kind of go away from the test preparation skills right now and start thinking about actually taking the test. Now that we discussed the test preparation skills, we can go into the real type of learning. That is, how to take the math test. But first of all, let me ask you some questions. How many of you have actually been taught how to take a test? I know quite a few hands probably went up. Now, how many of you have ever been taught how to take a math test? Probably very few hands went up, because most people don't know how to teach you how to take a math test. I know students have known the math material, understood the math material, and then couldn't show it on the test. A lot of these students come back and say, I ran out of test time. I got stuck on this one problem. I couldn't finish. And I start talking about test-taking procedures and test-taking skills, and they have no idea how to take this math test. What I want to do with you today is to show you the best way that I know how to take a math test. And after you learn this best way, you may take out a few steps, you may add a few steps, but at least you have the best idea of taking math tests. Remember this quote. When you take a math test, it's like a game almost. Most amount of points, least amount of time. So the idea is like a video game. Get those points up front, and the ones you can't get, wait till later on and try them. Now, let's first start looking at the first step of test taking. The first step is memory data dump. Now remember in high school when they told you to put your name on the paper first? You're not going to do that anymore. You're in college. You're going to take that test paper and turn it over and write down the facts, the figures, the concepts, the ideas, the formulas, everything you think you're going to forget. You write it down. You may spend 2 or 3 minutes doing that. You may develop some type of memory techniques that help you remind things, such as please excuse my dear Aunt Sally, which is the order of operations. Write that down, get it down, put it down, so later on you can refer to it. You also know that the first part of the test, you're fresh. Your memory's fresh, and do it now. Don't wait until the middle of the test where you may have some more anxiety, or you may have forgot some of these things. Now, let's look at the next one. Preview the test. That's step 2. Now you put your name on the test. You preview the test, and as you preview the test, you're looking for a couple things. Number 1, where are the easy questions? Remember, we talked about the video game, most amount of points, least amount of time. As you go through the test, mark the easy questions. The next thing you're looking for is these test questions that pop up at the end that are worth 20, 15 points. You've got to know that. You've got to preview the test to get an idea of what you need to work on first, second, third, and fourth. Okay? After doing that, we get into step 3, second memory data dump. Write down additional important information you may forget. Step 3 is very important because what you're doing is writing down the information you may forget after previewing the test. If you saw some test items you had difficulty with or think you have difficulty with, kind of remind yourself how to do those. That is a good second memory data dump. Write down any information, such as if this is a rate and distance problem, then go ahead and write down the rate and distance formula. Also, a lot of students had difficulty doing the second memory data dump because they think it's a waste of time. That's not true. As soon as you see the information and you have a spark in your mind of how to do it, you have to write it down. Other students will wait and during the test start writing it down and forget the important concepts. You don't want to forget the important concepts while you're in the middle of the test because it takes you longer to remember them. Another thing you can do too in your second memory data dump is expand the first memory data dump. You may see some more problems that are similar to the problems that you wrote down. Expand those. Take 2 or 3 minutes, maybe 4 minutes to write the information down because after you write it down, you got it. You won't lose it. Especially if you have test anxiety and have a tendency to lose problems, forget how to do problems in the middle of the test. That's not going to happen. Dump them down and then move on to the next step. The next step is test progress schedule. A lot of students don't even use the test progress schedule. However, this costs them points at the end of their tests because what happens, they start working the tests one by one and going through all the test questions, and what happens then is they run out of time. Now when we start looking at the test progress schedule up here, here's the main key. Deciding the best way to get the most points in the least amount of time. So what's happening in the test progress schedule is you've got to look at it and figure out how many points you have per question. For example, I'm going to show you a test made by DC Heath from their test bank of 10 problems. In those 10 problems, most of us will figure out how many we have to finish within the first half hour of an hour test. Now think about that. You've got 10 problems, how many are you going to finish in the first half hour? Now a lot of you are saying 5. Well, you're great at division, but you got the wrong answer here. What happens if you're doing the easiest problems first, you should have at least 6 done, maybe 7 done, because at the end you have to save that extra time for review. Now what's happened with the test progress schedule, you should divide the number of problems in half, but also you should figure out you have extra time at the end. Another thing with test progress schedules too is students have an ego problem with these questions. What these students will do is they'll start working on one question, spend 3 minutes, 4 minutes, 5 minutes, sometimes 10 minutes on one question and tell themselves, I gotta do it, I gotta do it, I gotta do it. And what happens, they run out of time, they don't finish the question, and eventually they run out of time on the test. What you want to do with the test progress schedule is figure out how many points it costs you if you're going to waste time. Another thing you do too is look at the number of questions. Like in this test we're talking about, it's 10 questions. Let's say you have an hour to do these 10 questions. You may want to spend about 4 minutes per question, and after 4 minutes, tell yourself to move on. Don't get stuck in the habit of trying to solve the problems you can't solve. So after you move on, do another question, and then maybe you can solve that one. But don't get stuck on one problem and waste all your time and lose time at the end of the test. Now I want to give you an example now of how a person did a test. And I want to show you this test now to show it how it should be after the first 4 steps. This is a Chapter 3 test in elementary algebra. What we're going to look at is how much information they put down in the memory data dump. This is his memory data dump. Look at this. He has A is less than B, then A plus C is less than B plus C. He has his A is less than B, then A times C is less than B times C. Then he has A is less than B, and then C is negative, then A times C is greater than B times C. This is a pretty good memory data dump because he put down the formulas so we can use them later on in the test. Okay, now let's take a look at the first part of the test. This student made several marks in this test. You can look at it. Look at problem number 1. He marked problem number 1 as being an easy problem. He marked problem number 2 as being an easy problem. He didn't mark problem number 3 because he thinks he's going to have difficulty on this one. He marked problem number 4 as an easy problem. Let's go ahead and turn the page and see what else he marked. He didn't mark number 5. He didn't mark number 6. For some reason, he knows how to do number 7. He didn't mark number 8 either. So let's look at the last page of this test and see if he marked anything on the last page. On the last page of the test, you can see there's story problems or word problems. He didn't mark these, but at least he knows they're back here. A lot of students would have started on the first page, start working them in number order, and all of a sudden be surprised on the last page with these story problems. Another thing you have to look at too, a lot of students tell me that they want to go ahead and just do the problems in a row. Now for some students that may work, but for most students, the easiest ones are not in a row. So the idea here is to look at this test, do the easiest problems first, develop your confidence, develop your expertise, help you recall the information, and then go ahead and start doing the most difficult ones. So now we're going to go back to the 10 steps of test taking and see what our next step is. Okay, the next step is step 5, answer easy questions. What the student's going to do with this test is go through that test, and every question that he marked, he's going to answer first. Like question number 1, question number 2, etc. After finish all those questions that he's marked, he's going to go back over the test and start looking for other easy questions to answer. When he starts looking at question number 3, if he can decide to answer that one, he'll do it and move on. The idea of answering these easy questions is to get the most amount of points in least amount of time. After answering all the easy questions, now we have to go on to step number 6. That's skip difficult answers. In other words, you're having trouble answering that question. You have to read it at least twice. The first time you read that question, it becomes very clear to you. However, some students have to read it twice for it to become very clear. You want to read it twice to get it into your long-term memory, or at least into your conscious. Because reading it twice will help you work on that problem while you're working on other problems. Now, a lot of students have had what we call the aha response. That is, they read this question over here like we talked about, and then what happened was that halfway through the test, they had this, aha, now I remember how to do that. If you have that aha response, stop right there and go back to that question and put something down. Put something down that reminds you how to do that question or finish that question. We know a lot of students who have the aha response and say, oh, I know how to do that. I'll just finish this question here and then I'll go back. Well, they finish the question there, they go back and they can't remember how to do the other question. So what happens is use this aha response to your advantage and keep moving on. Now, let's look at the next step. Review skipped questions. And review skipped questions, what you want to do is go back and say, okay, I tried at this one, I'm going to work hard at this one, and I'm going to look at it again. I'm going to review this. Then I want you to think about anything that you can write down. Think about the teacher doing that on the chalkboard. Think about how it was done in the homework. Kind of just open up your mind, and anything that comes out, you write down. What you're trying to do now is recall any tidbit of information to trigger that memory process for you to remember. As you go through this question of reviewed skipped questions, you may read it again, may read it twice again, but if you get stuck in one, you can't do anything, go on to the next question. The whole idea is to start working these questions. If you can't finish, let your subconscious again work on the answer. Again, you may have the aha response. Now I'm going to get down to this step right here. Guess at remaining questions. We know about guessing at questions. In multiple choice tests, you can go ahead and guess, and if you have 5 alternatives, you have about 25, or should say 20% probability of getting it right. In mathematics tests, what is the probability of you getting a mathematics test correct if it's not a multiple choice test? We kind of know that. It's called 1 over infinity, in other words, about 0. So the idea here is, what can we do to at least get some points on this test and some points on this question to help you? So, when you're back at this guess at remaining questions, the main thing is do not leave a question blank. Now let's say that very definitively. Don't leave it blank. Just think about writing the first step. Just kind of write that first step and get it down. As you write that first step and get it down, then think about the next step and the next step. We know if you write something down, you may get 1 or 2 points. And 1 or 2 points can make the difference between a B and an A. So don't leave it blank, write it down. Also, we have students that are very kinesthetic learners. These kinesthetic learners have to write to remember. So as you start writing, I've had students that started writing and they said, well, as I started writing, I remembered how to do it. And they wrote some more, and wrote some more, and wrote some more, and then maybe they didn't get the whole answer down, but at least they got part of it down and got more points. So basically, don't leave it blank, write something down, and you should get a few extra points. Next step, review entire test. A lot of students don't like to stay in the classroom and review the entire test. They have difficulty staying in there for a couple of reasons. Number one is test anxiety. They have a lot of test anxiety, which means they want to leave the room and get out of there as soon as possible. Another reason, though, is more important in some cases. That is, the student will not be caught dead handing their test paper in last. Somewhere in high school, they got the idea that if I handed my test paper in last, then I'm not the smart one in the class. And also they think if they hand their test paper in last, the instructor doesn't think they're smart. Now we've got to change this type of behavior because we know a lot of things about research in this area. Number one, if you had about 25 students in the classroom and the first 5 people hand their test paper in, we know that most of those students will make A's and probably a few F's. Now look at the last 5 or 6 people who hand their test paper in. The same thing happens. Many of them make A's and B's and a few make D's and most probably could make F's. But the idea is that there are a lot of A's and B's in there and have a lot of students that will stay in the classroom, work on those tests, catch those careless errors, and go from a B to an A. Very, very important to tell yourself, it doesn't matter how long I stay in the classroom, it doesn't matter how long I stay and work on this test, the teacher's not going to think any different of me. In fact, some teachers think more of you if you spend more time working on the test. Another thing in the area of review entire test is looking for what we call careless errors. Yes, the careless errors are very important. You have to keep checking for careless errors and checking for them because a lot of times you don't see them the first time you go through. Another thing we're going to look at too is how to prepare you to check all your answers. One good way is to look at the equations and put the answers back into the equations and see if each side of the equation matches up. Very good technique, takes a little bit of time, but for sure you'll know if you have the right answer. Next thing is doing the test questions on a separate sheet of paper. Do them on a separate sheet of paper and see if you have the same answer compared to the first time. If you don't have the same answer, then check each step, because if you check each step, you can find your mistake. And after you find a mistake, you can change the answer or keep the original one you had. What you have to do is keep working at this and keep reviewing your test. Now let's go to the last step of test taking. The last step of test taking is use all your test time. We know that students who use all their test time get more points and get better grades. It's been researched for years and we know that. Earlier we talked about the fact that sometimes you have test anxiety and sometimes you don't want to be caught dead handing your test paper in last. Forget about those ideas because you can become more successful and stay in that classroom. We know that working hard and remembering can help you improve your answers on that test. So stay there and work hard. Now that we've finished with the 10 steps of test taking, let's talk about something else. Imagine that it's the last 10 minutes of your test. In the last 10 minutes of your test, you've got to make a decision. Do I review for careless errors, or do I work on those problems I had difficulty with? Now with our student we talked about earlier, this student made a lot of mistakes and careless errors. And with that student, what we have to do is have them review for careless errors. The next thing you got to look at is you. What should you do and how should you handle this? Because what happens if you make the wrong decision, you could be losing points. Because if you check for careless errors and don't have that many careless errors, you could be losing points on not answering the right questions. If you work on those questions a lot and don't get any points there and have a bunch of careless errors, you can lose points too. We've talked about test anxiety several times during the 10 steps of test taking. What I want to do right now is discuss how we can help you reduce your test anxiety. I've had hundreds of students come talk to me about test anxiety, and I've done a lot of research on this and helped hundreds of students become more relaxed and take tests. But we need to talk about test anxiety from a couple of points. Number one, test anxiety is a learned behavior. You weren't born with test anxiety. You understood the math at one time, took the test, felt real comfortable. Now sometimes you don't understand the math as much, creates anxiety. Now you're associating the math test with test anxiety, and now you have test anxiety. We have to look at two types of test anxiety, and this is very important. The first type of test anxiety is what we call cognitive anxiety. That's the one when you sit down and take the test. You look at the test and you're going, oh my goodness, this is a math test. I can't do well on a math test. This is horrible, it's terrible. I can't handle this test. I want to get out of here. I don't want to be in this room anymore. And you start doing this negative self-talk. That's what I was talking about earlier, to tell yourself, I'll do well. I can handle that. I can do the problems. I can do the answers. I can do as much as I can. Also, that's another reason why we have you do the first problems that are easiest first. In other words, you mark off those first problems, then you go back and do them. As you start doing those problems, then you get more confident. That is what we call cognitive anxiety that affects a lot of students. The next one is what we call somatic anxiety. Somatic anxiety is your body, the upset stomach, the sweaty palms. In fact, I tease my students, on test day, I can shake their hand and tell if they have test anxiety because my hand will slide out due to all the sweaty palms. So the idea here is looking at somatic anxiety is your blood pressure goes up, your respiration comes rapid and shallow, and you don't feel well. Now, with the cognitive anxiety or the somatic anxiety, you're focusing on those things. You're focusing on that anxiety and not focusing on how to recall information for the test, which is probably the number one problem students have with test anxiety. They get into the room, they start taking the test, and all of a sudden they blank out. Well, we're going to talk about how to deal with that in a few minutes. Another problem students have with test anxiety is leaving the room, and we already talked about that too. They get so anxious they got to leave the room. A third problem students have with test anxiety is doing their homework, and most people don't mention this one. That is, they start doing their homework, they feel pretty comfortable, they do a few problems, then they miss a few, then they take a break. Then they come back, work a little more, miss a few more, get more anxious because it reminds them how they didn't do so well in that last test and take a break. After a while, they don't come back from the break. Now, I know that breaks are important, and I wouldn't study math more than probably 20 minutes or 30 minutes or so without taking a break, unless I'm really in the flow of things. When you get stuck, you should take breaks, but that's no excuse for not going back to the test problems. So now we have this deal with test anxiety and how students need to work with it. A couple of things you can do to help you decrease your test anxiety. One is study more, but don't believe the fact that if you study a lot, it's going to take the test anxiety away. I had a student with 150 IQ taking a Calculus 1 test. This student could do that Calculus 1 test in 20 minutes, but she was getting B's. Her anxiety was so high, she couldn't stay there longer. I did some relaxation training with her, taught her some relaxation skills, and she stayed there no longer and started making A's. Now, she's not dumb. She's very smart, and she studied 20 or 30 hours a week for those tests. So the idea of studying more may help some students and may not help others. In fact, I have some students who don't study at all and have no test anxiety. They know they're going to fail, so they don't even try. Now, back to helping you with test anxiety. Let's talk about visual imagery. Visual imagery is a good test anxiety reducing procedure. What I want you to do is visualize yourself being in a very relaxed place. That is, closing your eyes and visualizing yourself being very relaxed. A beach scene, like a waterfall scene, any type of scene that makes you very relaxed. What you do is close your eyes and visualize that for maybe a minute or two. As you're visualizing that, think positive thoughts. I'm happy, I'm in control of my life, I can do different things. As you visualize that, it helps you become very, very relaxed. And this relax yourself at the same time. Now, you should practice this 2 or 3 times a day before taking the test. As soon as you walk in and take the test, you're going to start closing your eyes and visualizing those relaxing places. You may want to pick 2 of them. As the teacher is getting ready to hand you the test, you can open up your eyes and do the first step of test taking, which is, you know what? Memory data dump. Turn that test over and write that material down. Write that material down. Now you're starting to write the material down. You're saying, my goodness, I do know some math. Then you do the next step, basically, which is previewing the test and marking those easy answers. Mark them, get it ready. So now when you start taking the test, you're ready to go. You've already written some stuff down that you know, and you've already solved several problems. Like this person here solved 4 problems immediately, he already had 40 points. That's one technique. Another technique is called tensing and relaxing. This one's a good one. Some of us walk in with a lot of nervous energy. And if I want to make you really relaxed, I'll just have you run around the track for about 10 or 15 minutes and then come in. Now, you may not like that, but it'll probably relax you. Instead of running around the track for 10 or 15 minutes, what I want you to do is put your feet flat on the floor and grab underneath your desk. Push down on your feet and pull up on your arms and tense all those muscles for 2 or 3 seconds. Maybe 5 seconds at most. Tense them all up. You may want to do that right now. Just kind of tense up those muscles. Then relax them. Just relax them for a few minutes, then tense them up and relax them. Then tense them up and relax them. You may want to do that about 3 times. First of all, it gets your mind off the anxiety and gets you doing something. Second of all, it gets that nervous energy out. So you tense, relax. Then you do visual imagery, and then you wait for the test. And as you're doing the visual imagery, add in the material that you want to do your memory data dump on. That is, kind of say it over your head a little bit. Say it in your head, so as soon as you get to test, you turn it over. Now, these are some short-term techniques on relaxation training. I'm not guaranteeing that these will work for everybody, but it works for quite a few people. If you have more serious problems with anxiety, you might want to see your counselor or talk to the math instructor, and they have math anxiety programs in a lot of campuses. So that's enough about test anxiety. You need to practice with the test anxiety reduction procedures and use them. Become an internal locus of control person by doing the steps we talked about and practicing relaxation. Now we want to go ahead and look at the summary of the different techniques and procedures we talked about today. I'd like to summarize what we've done so far. Part 1 focused on reasons for students not doing well in their math classes, and also focused up here on test preparation skills and test taking skills. We talked about reasons students didn't do well in mathematics. A lot of those reasons are because we have not taught you good test taking skills and good study skills. In this first part of this workshop, you now know good test taking skills, and you can use those. You also know good test preparation skills. For example, you need to look at your old test to figure out the errors you made earlier. You need to look at the pre-test and develop your own pre-test, because this is how you learn what you don't know before you enter the test. And the study groups are good for most people, but the main thing is the calculators. I've seen so many students who got in there, didn't know how to work the calculator, and lost test points because they couldn't finish the test in time due to the fact the calculator didn't work. So what happens now is you need to look at all these test preparation skills and do every one of them to enhance your learning before you enter the test situation. After you enter the test situation, let's talk again a little bit about the test taking skills. Looking at the test taking skills again, major points. Number 1, memory data dump. You have to do it. I've had hundreds and hundreds of students tell me by this doing the memory data dump, they got 5 extra points in their test. Do it, practice it ahead of time, and know what you're going to write down. Next important one, answer easiest questions first. You always do that. Get the most amount of points, least amount of time, and get those questions answered. It increases your ego as far as doing the test, and also could increase some of your test speed because you get more confident. The last one, using all your test time. You have to use all that test time. We talked about how you can reduce your test anxiety. We also talked about the idea that handing your test paper in last doesn't mean that you don't know mathematics. You need to focus on keeping your test as long as you can until the teacher yanks it out of your hand or till the bell rings. Thank you for watching part 1 of this workshop. Now you know some good skills to help you improve your grades and show them on tests. Next thing we can do is go to part 2 of this workshop. You may see part 2 later on today or maybe next week or whatever. But in part 2 of this workshop, you have to bring in some of your last math tests. Because what we're going to do now is analyze these math tests and figure out how we can improve your test-taking skills. Before we talked about which way you should go. Should you review for careless errors, or should you try to do the problems you couldn't do? After we do the test analysis, we'll know that answer, and then you can start applying that technique and make even better grades on your tests. Thank you for watching part 1.